Welcome to Talent Strategy 60. I am your friendly neighborhood talent strategy nerd, Dr. Jim, and the purpose of the show and the purpose of the channel is to empower talent leaders to do more with less by leveraging the power of collective intelligence. And today's show is going to be focused on why leading with values builds better organizations. And to guide us through that conversation, we have our two featured guests joining us today. And we're going to take some time to get to know them a little bit better. First up, we have Jane Redden. Welcome on the show. Welcome aboard, Jane.
Oh, thanks, Jim. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. I think as we get rolling, let's learn a little bit more about Jane and your story and kind of what you're up to, so that the audience gets familiar, and then we'll move to Patrick's story.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, thank you. I am absolutely thrilled to be here. I'm a general partner here at Albion VC, and we are resolutely and unashamedly a business, an early stage VC who invests. We've got $1 billion under management, and we invest as a specialist fund in businesses who have a purpose-driven mantra, those that want to have or bring impact for good. So we are a specialist investor in the intersection between software and health tech. We sit in London, but we invest in businesses that are looking to expand globally. We do so from seed stage through to Series B, and I lead the platform team. So what my role specifically focuses on my team, we focus on building the organization. So we're interested in creating more valuable businesses. So shared value, shared growth means shared value. So it's slightly different context for the word value here. But the organizational performance of the human capital lever of growth, therefore leading into obviously the discussion that we're going to have around talent and leadership and performance and organizational performance of a business has been my career for 25 years. So yeah, very, very interested in as I say, my tribe is very much early stage founders who are looking to scale their organizations, and their technologies, using technologies where the values, if you like, the purpose, the higher order purpose, is to bring a positive impact, to do good in the world.
So I appreciate you sharing that, Jane, and it got me thinking. The part that caught my attention was that you're a partner in a VC firm that is looking for purpose-driven or purpose-focused organizations. So why was it important to you, as a professional with a lot of experience in this space, to partner up with an organization like that versus, your garden variety VC firms?
Yeah, amazing question. It's meaningful work, right? I am absolutely dedicated as a professional. I've spent 25 years in this ecosystem, and I intend to spend the next 25 years finding purpose to my own work, finding meaning to my own work, and to link to find a home here as I bring all aspects of myself, frankly, at a sacrifice to, the family that I don't see because of it, or the inspiration that I'm trying to show for my daughter. But by the way, that generation, so she's 15, it's a non-negotiable for them, right? They want to do meaningful work. She is not going to entertain any organization that doesn't fit with this higher order purpose, and I want to be a role model for that. It is. Yeah, it is. It's about bringing our creativity and our technical domain and our technical expertise to something which feels more than a transaction.
Awesome stuff. And I appreciate you sharing that. And I think you're dead on when you say that when you look at the largest cohorts of the employee landscape, Generation Z and millennials, they are highly motivated by joining or leaving organizations that actually live their purpose and value. So I think that's an important call out. I want to take some time and introduce our second feature panelist, Patrick. Welcome to the show. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jim, for having me on. Yeah, I've been a part of, I would say, 3 high growth startups so far. I had the privilege of working at a company called PFL, which was the second scale up I was a part of. And that was the first encounter I had with kind of a values-led organization. And so that was a great company to grow up in a little bit. I was there for just over 7 years. I'm now with a company called Administrate. We're a training operations platform, taking a little different approach to the industry and kind of creating a new category there. But joined them early on. We're 8 years in. I spent seven of those years living in Edinburgh, Scotland, as we got that off the ground, and am back in our U.S. office now in Bozeman, Montana.
So I'd like you to expand a little bit on the Administrate story, because there's an interesting history there. And you and I were talking, months ago, and you mentioned that you had two different options in terms of how you grow the organization. Give us a behind the scenes on the path that you took and why you took that path.
Yeah, sure. So we, I won't get too detailed, but we saw a market demand early on for what we were trying to do, and it's actually why I joined the organization. We encountered the same pain at PFL. I saw this opportunity, saw it as kind of a blue ocean to get into, and so joined up. We had a lot of demand from kind of the SMB market, and as we grew the platform, we came to this point, especially when we started to get noticed by mid-market and enterprise, which was, do we build something that is automated and low touch and kind of maybe lower price, or do we go almost all in and do high touch and build for enterprise and do it right and have kind of a piece that is not just a product, but also the team along with the product? And we recognized that there was a large opportunity there. It would take a lot of investment and a lot of work, but that's really what was going to be more fulfilling for us in the company. We felt like it was part of our values. And so we made the leap in kind of 2016, 2017 to start to pivot into that high touch model enterprise platform space.
So thanks for providing that context there. And I think there's something that you mentioned in that story that will tie into the overall conversation that we're going to have. And it's this idea that, you can't be all things to all people. And that mentality actually is part of the reason I believe a lot of organizations go wrong, because you're in a mad dash to drive as much revenue as possible by taking on any customer as possible. And I think in that rush to kind of go to that motion, it has a lot of impact in how you build an organization, how you treat your customers, how you develop your people. So there's a systemic impact of taking that, that aggressive revenue only focused or primarily revenue focused approach to the marketplace. What we want to do in this conversation is maybe set the stage for a different way of growth, relying on both of your experiences to build a roadmap for those HR leaders and leaders in general who are in the audience are going to be catching this and thinking about, okay, how do I structure an organization the right way so that it's much more inclusive, much more considerate of our employee landscape, and paints a path forward that doesn't treat the customer and doesn't treat the employee as kind of disposable cogs in the wheel. So that's a tall order to do in 60 minutes, but that's what we're going to do. And in the process, we're going to answer a number of questions. We're going to take a look at, how does this approach where you're leading with values impact your customer motion? How does it impact your hiring motion? How does it impact your development motion? And these are all keys to building successful organizations. So the first question that I have for you, Jane, is I've laid the gauntlet down.
Yes.
I've laid the gauntlet down. Are we talking about something that we shouldn't talk about? Is this a realistic mission for us to adopt as a different way of growing organizations? What are your thoughts on all the stuff that I laid out?
Love it. Yeah, I mean, tall order. You're absolutely right. But let me start with a couple of thought starters, if you like, so, and then we'll follow on. Today's organizations are, the agile teams, the high performative, high growth businesses that I work with, all of the time, are formed by a group, an understanding that the team who works in them has a need, as well as to deliver to the company, and the company has a need to deliver to the individual, to the team. So that we have this phrase called like the WIFM, like what's in it for me, and that is like a Venn diagram of what's the company doing for me is as important as what I'm doing for the company. And so you're describing there in the previous iteration of command and control and just frankly caning the employees and treating them like disposable entities, isn't a relationship that a high-performing individual will sustain for long. They just simply won't stay in the organization. Rather than you have this idea not of a hierarchical organization with a clear mandate from the top. We've got these very agile, highly distributed, often remote first, rapidly changing organizations and teams and goals, frankly, that need to have instead something which is going to allow them to have this elasticity while we're all collectively trying to face in the same direction. Right, because otherwise you get this chaos. And so I'd love to throw out this idea, if I may, of a network. So think of an organization not as a solid pyramid with these lines that like bind together to this one or two key decision makers, but rather a constellation of functions and of deliverables that have the customer front and center. So we have a mapping tool that we use, which puts the customer at the far left, and then we talk about how does the organization deliver to that customer in terms of functional deliverables. But really, what is interesting here, furthermore, when you think about nestling values into that, is how does the frankly gravitational forces, think of them, these functions, these teams, these individuals like planets or stars, you're kind of connecting in a galaxy. This constellation thinking requires some binding together nevertheless. And it has to be stretchy and elastic. It can't be rigid and just one way. But there nevertheless needs to be some binding force so that can create gravitational understanding of what we're all here to do in this highly kind of mobile environment. And their values can serve as a very strong way of this kind of sustaining a gravitational force as we begin to articulate and the sort of, I suppose, the symbiotic two-way messaging between the key decisions that are happening in at the center, so to speak, of the sun, and then the distributed, highly autonomous, but nevertheless messages that are received from the coalface out in this network, and how those capsule communicators, as they're often referred to, how those messages move around this network, how the binding forces come together to create a performative organization.
So I like there's a ton of stuff that I want to unpack and get Patrick's thoughts on it as well. So you mentioned the concept of, you called it a constellation. I describe organizations in a lattice framework.
Lattice,
and
love that too.
And it's again, in opposition to the command and control approaches that we may have all come up in. So I really like what you said there. But there was another element that you mentioned, and I think this is what Evan Patterson in the comments was responding to, was this whole idea of being agile and flexible, both from your customer ecosystem and your employee ecosystem, and how you need to be able to pivot rapidly to meet the needs. And I think that's really powerful as well. I want to give Patrick an opportunity to kind of take those two concepts, building an organization where your customer is central and your employees central, and building it in such a way where your values provide the glue that allows you to be flexible and move at the pace that the market is moving. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, good question. I think there's two parts of that. The first I'll address is, we have this concept of, we call it the or the ultimate human organization, and we want to be an elevator for our employees, our customers, our investors, and our communities. And so we've seen, we get very excited when a customer of ours gets promoted in their own company due to the success they're having with our platform. We like to see our employees, get promoted and seize opportunity as we grow. And we ultimately believe that pays off for our investors, and they're very much behind that. To the point of being agile and being flexible and adaptable, I think we've seen this tested recently with COVID and economic movements, but values are the principles by which you live by, and so we kind of say our values are there; they're not on the wall for a reason, so to speak. But folks who came in and observed us working should be able to call out what those values are. And those principles are really what gets tested in the tough times, I think. Whether that's a short-term business, pitfall, or a decision that has to be made, or, COVID comes on the scene and our customers, need help, and our organization needs to adapt and go remote immediately, and that sort of thing. And so I think when you have those values, you don't need command and control. You don't need the top saying, this is what to do next. Those values are what all of our employees embody, and that's how they make decisions, and that's how we're able to stay nimble and move forward.
I love that. So, and it's like sorry, I was just going to say, Jim, to echo that. I love that, Patrick. The behaviors when no one's watching, right? Like what, in the remote environment, you have to, there's an autonomy that is just a given. And by codifying those values, by making them clear, by enabling them to live and breathe, it's a really it becomes this living culture, which is the ultimate goal of a values-led organization. Can I just add? It was one thing that I have noticed, though, rather controversially, if I can put it in. I think we shouldn't underestimate the importance of role modeling. So that one of the things that I chastise some of the leaders for in our businesses, if I may be so bold as to sort of go there, is because it's one thing to say it and then to act differently, right? If there's a delta between the way that you're showing up as a leader because you just think that you can, and then the values by which you're expecting others to abide by, it has to be synonymous, and it is absolutely 100% the gift of a founder and a CEO to continue to set those, right? That it continues to be their gift. My recommendation to talent leaders is that they can be extremely powerful in embedding and cascading the way that they show up across the entire employee value proposition and the employee lifecycle. So get that right. Like, make sure it's a paradigm which is set by the senior leader, but codified there, but embedded and cascaded via the HR team.
I totally agree with the position that you're bringing forward, Jane, and I think it ties back into Patrick, and I'm going to come back to you in a second, Patrick, on something that Patrick mentioned. So when we're thinking about a performative values exercise versus an actual values exercise, and I think the way that I understand what you're saying, Jane, is that leaders have to walk the values that are on the wall versus just having it on the wall and just be something that we look at on our quarterly meetings, and then when it comes to business operations, we just kind of do what we need to do. Yeah. So I think that
I think notice, right? People will notice.
So I think that's a great call out, but I want to shift the conversation a little bit. So I know that we're setting the stage about why and how you build a values-led organization and how that's a better pathway. there's going to be people that listen to this conversation about values, and this is to you, Patrick, and they're going to kind of roll their eyes and say, oh, this is all soft, squishy stuff that doesn't really drive the bottom line. You, as a multiple time tech founder, how would you rebut that position that hey, this values stuff really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things? It's all about driving profitability. So I'm kind of taking the Jack Welch approach to building a business by saying that.
Yeah, I think about it a couple of ways. One is, what do you want in the long term? Do you want a short, quick exit? I think that's a different company than having kind of the values-based long-term approach, kind of the 100-year plan sort of thing. And I think, when you're crafting these values, it's important to know that if you say, you want scalability as a value or reliability, what does that actually mean? And we talk about it at different stages. So we do kind of a values onboarding when we bring new employees, and sometimes we'll talk about, reliability 3 years ago meant, making sure our platform was live 99% of the time or something like that. Today it means much more than that. It means delivering for the customer, in these certain ways. And so it's always taking a snapshot of where are we at versus our values and what are our values mean for us today. We also have our value, that's kind of the end value, is question everything. And we want to make sure that values are never, I think, below anyone. So you can question anyone on those, but also question your own values. Is this really what we want and we want to continue doing as a company? Do these apply anymore? I think we wrapped a value. We used to have a value of frugality when we were starting out and we're very small, and we wrapped that under being scalable, because we felt like that was part of being scalable ongoing, but we didn't necessarily need to call it out anymore. And so having that look, it doesn't have to be, every month you're looking at your values, but at the year planning stage, something like that. Is this really what we want? Is this still aligned to our mission and our vision? Has anything changed?
There's something that you mentioned there that I think is really powerful, and that's this concept of you talked about when somebody is onboarded, you take them through that values exercise, and then one of your core values is question everything. And I think that's a key point to draw out, is that the more you can embed your values across your entire sort of operational framework, the better off you're going to be. That takes it away from the poster that's on the wall to something that you live. So I think that's really something that's important. And there's another element that I want Jane's input on this values conversation. When you think about building an organization from a values first perspective, so you have a clear mission and vision that you've defined, you've built values that align with those things. How are you syncing those up with your talent strategy? And here's where I'm going with this. So Evan Patterson just chimed in the chat, and he said, when you're hiring, and you're hiring based off of a strongly defined values perspective, and I'm going to pull that chat up so that we can see it. He said the thing that he mentioned is character-based hiring should trump skill-based hiring. Yeah. So give us some examples of how values should show up in your hiring and people strategy that you've seen work really well.
Great. Use a scorecard. And I want to just try and give you a visual, which, because I have a scorecarding tool, which is without question the most valuable tool that I've built of the many diagnostic tools that I've built in my career. It's the one that I use every single week and share with everybody in the portfolio. And there's lots of different scorecards out there, so I just want to put that out, but just trying to unpack for you in a visual what ours looks like and how we use values here. Think of a beach ball. if I was to hold a beach ball really close to you, let's just say it's on the orange stripe, and you hold the beach ball up so close that frankly, the only thing you can see is orange. It would therefore not be implausible, like would be very plausible, should I say, to imagine that the whole beach ball is orange, right? So let's just take that. So if I hold it so close, I'm just going to sort of look at the orange stripe, but I think the whole beach ball is orange. Imagine that that orange stripe represents the candidate's CV, the candidate's track record, what they've done before. Right? If I'm only going to measure that in my hiring strategy or my, when I'm assessing a candidate, then I'm going to miss what if I pull away just ever so slightly to see the whole beach ball, I'm able to see that there's actually multiple colors. There's a green and a blue and a white and an orange or a red, whatever your beach ball consists of. So think of, first of all, this idea of a multi-stripe kind of dimensions, multiple dimensions to look at your candidates and to measure your candidates as you assess them. So say, for example, you've got 4 or 5 key criteria on your track record. That's your orange stripe. So you need to test for those things in your assessment process. Then you've got the next stripe along. So I just want to sort of, I articulate for you 4 stripes, which is the minimum viable scorecard that I would encourage anybody to start to build. So I'm hoping that at the end of this, everyone can go away and build their own scorecard in this way if they want to. So the first stripe is track record. So what are the key achievements that need to be articulated, and articulate them as achievements rather than as time spent in role, and be specific there. Role strengths is really interesting. That's the next stripe, and that is unique to each position. So it's almost like, how does this person show up? What are the strengths that this individual in their function and at the level they need to demonstrate as role strengths to be good at doing the thing? So how do they do? What do they need to be great at? And that could include things like creating structure out of unstructure, analytical detail orientation, communication, persuasiveness, etc., etc. So that's specific to the role. So it's going to change depending on where they sit in the org. The next stripe is absolutely and essentially the core values of the business. But here's the rub. I've tested this over, I've recruited more than 500 hires in my career and tested more than 12,000 individuals I've currently individually carried out, and then advised many hundreds of teams on how to interview. And here's what I noticed. If you can turn your values into behaviors, and then ask questions, structured questions about the behaviors rather than about the value, you get much more certainty that the individual demonstrates the value. But you're not really, you are testing the value, but you're testing the behaviors. So the leap is to codify then the behaviors. Like what does someone who has this value show up like? Write that down explicitly, and then define in your question playbook what are the questions that we're going to ask to test for those behaviors. That gets you to a really pragmatic way of using your values in your hiring scorecard or your assessment process. And then the fourth, I just finish on the fourth, I won't spend very long there, but because I can see you've got another question, and I know that I've talked for a long time. But the fourth stripe that became very obvious to me as I was working with startup leaders who could possess all of the things that we've just described there and still not perform. What I set out over 5 years to understand is, what does high performance mean in a startup, in the startup DNA? And we call those the edge capabilities, and there are 12 competencies that show up in high performing leaders. And this is the way of getting growth mindset alongside your values, alongside specific role strengths, alongside the track record, and can be very, very, very powerful.
So being the talent strategy nerd that I am, that I can't let go of a great framework. And I might have actually botched this because I counted five things that you mentioned. So one is define the role. Second is establish a track record. Third is align to your core values. Fourth is define what your behaviors are. And fifth is identify what your edge cases are that aren't central to the role, but would help. So Did I create an
Yeah, you did.
added
You
step.
created one extra. So there are 4 on your scorecard. You've got, say, think of it like a dance floor with like 20 boxes. And the way that I, encourage the leaders to test for this is to then pick out of those 20 the 6 that matter most. So weighting your scorecard is really, really powerful, and that holds you to objectivity when bias kicks in and you fall in love for a bias reason with a particular candidate. But your 4 columns, and they read downwards as opposed to from left to right. So there's no correlation left to right, although you can check for repeats. The first is, what are the track record achievements that the individual needs to show up to the party with? The second is, according to the specificity of that role in the function and at the level, what are the 4 or 5 key role strengths that this individual needs to demonstrate? And this is really important, right? Don't add more rows. Like, you've got max 5 rows. And so you've got 5 things. You've got to go to the things that matter most and try and prioritize to those. The third column is values. But what you want to try and do within your values is, if you haven't got, if for a hiring point of view, you might have, say, what you talk about, resilience or tenacity, or customer obsession comes up, for example, quite a lot in the values that I work with for teams. Now, let's articulate as a subset of those values what those behaviors are that show up when someone who has the value of being customer obsessed. And then that's what you put on the scorecard. So you've got 2 in 1, basically, Jim. And then the 4th column is what we call the startup edge, which is growth mindset operationalized.
Got it. Really good stuff, and I appreciate you keeping me honest. I want to have Patrick. There isn't even a Pete on this show. I want to have Patrick chime in and either add to kind of what you were talking about, Jane, or I'd like to potentially take that beach ball concept that you talked about. The way that it hit me is that you need to be looking at the big picture versus taking a microscopic or focused picture on a small area of the business. And I'm curious to get Patrick's take on taking that big picture values driven view and how that would show up in your customer strategy. So that's outward. And also how that would show up on your internal people strategy. What are the things that you've seen that values led motion? How have you seen that show up in both of those instances?
Yeah, that's really good, Jim. I think one thing to point out is when you do see disparity among your strategies and your values. So if we're very focused on our people and not as much on our customer or not as much on our community, all of these have to be kind of in sync with each other, or you start to see the stool wobble, so to speak. I will say, in the customer motion or experience, that has to permeate everything. We think about the customer experience. We go through meetings based on the customer journey, starting from marketing, sales, professional services, product, all the way through to community, and that is very key. I think the other thing is, we tend to see that our customers and our prospects evaluate us and hold us accountable to our values that we post on the website, and that's actually pretty awesome. We had a customer, a Fortune 50, when they were bringing us on, let us know that they reviewed our values in detail and then watched our sales team live up to those values. And that was super cool to see. And it's great to see when customers, during COVID, we had some customers that had cash issues, during COVID. How do you make it work for them? How do you make it work for your own company? And just working together kind of based on those values. And it's not me making all those calls with each customer. It's kind of, here's the parameters we know we need to live within, but those values are driving those decisions day to day with our customer success teams to make sure that we're delivering for them, during those tough times.
So I want to stay with you, Patrick, a little bit and have you expand on how having a strong and well-defined set of values as an organization informs both your selling motions and what your sellers do, and also what your customer success teams do. Can you give us more of a better example, or at least expand on what you just talked about, because I think that's really important. And where I'm going with the question is that, you know, if you're overly revenue focused as far as, hey, this is what we want to do, you tend to fall into this trap where you're treating everybody as transactional. So tell us a little bit more about how your strong footing in values allowed you to not only keep, but also potentially expand customers over the long haul in those economic downturns.
Yeah, really, really good question. I think there's a few aspects to this. One is we're enterprise software. We're getting into a relationship, you know, when we sell, and people in our space and buying our product really want a partner. There's a real journey and transformation that has to happen in addition to buying our product. So they want to know who they're working with, and we have to live that out. I think you know, there was one point in we had a cruise line in COVID that completely, you know, stock price dropped to almost nothing. We had just launched go live with them 2 months prior, having loads of success. They went into complete cost cutting mode at the top, but we had a department that was very using our software in a very critical way, and we're almost kind of, you know, completely saddened to call us and say, "Hey, we're not going to be able to continue with you for right now." We made the decision to go ahead and do kind of 6 months at a time a zero pay contract with them, and said, "We're going to let you keep going here. We're going to stay with you. We're going to help you get through this, and we believe that'll pay off for us long term." They came back at a higher ACV when COVID was kind of over, and the cruise lines are back up. And you know, we just did a renewal with them again, and our you know, ACVs increased again. So that's just some of that trust that's built, and living out some of those values as you go through some of that.
Really great example, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it brings to mind one of my favorites is shocker, nerd likes a book, which is Customer for Life, and the mentality behind that entire book. And if you haven't picked it up or read it, for those that are checking out the stream, definitely get it. But the idea is, you want to engage in everything that you do in the marketplace from the perspective that any relationship that you build is a relationship for life. So whether it's a personal relationship, professional relationship, or a customer relationship, you want to focus and put priority on that relationship first, and that actually will inform your ability to inform how you interact. If you're looking at it as a purely monetary relationship, we know what happens when you approach things that way. You're not really built to last. So Jane, I want to get your input on something. So Patrick mentioned something that's really interesting, and it's the customer for life mentality, and how you need to be flexible and empathetic in a lot of ways, and how you react to kind of earn that business over a lifetime. Now, how would you apply that concept to a people development strategy for organizations? So whether you're a startup or an accelerating growth organization, how do you take what Patrick did from a customer perspective and apply it to your people development strategy?
Yeah, brilliant question. So I've done a study actually of look, it's a small data set because it's our, you know, it's our portfolio, but and then I've added anecdotal evidence of my, you know, 20 years of this work, and tried to distill down and I'm just going to set this out so that people don't think that this is carte blanche, exactly what you need to do. But for an early stage scaling organization, what I try to understand is, out of all the things that you could do to build a performative organization, let me use that word explicitly as opposed to people development, but I'm going to answer your question in this. To create a fitness to scale of your organization, using values, or with values as your core tenet here, what do you go to? Like, what do you do first, almost? Because you could kind of do anything if there's no organizational structure set up and no people development strategy established yet. And there are 4 things that I want to talk about as being absolutely like, if you work on all of these 4s and pull your values through into the strategy that you set, you're going to have success, guarantee it. The first is goal setting. So have you got goal accountability and goal clarity? And are you tying your values? Basically, it's like codifying your values and then tying those into the way that you're setting and delivering goals. And the goal accountability specifically is what I'm talking about here. The second is use values in the conversation around decision-making autonomy. So how can people use values in order to make decisions in a distributed way is a very good way of creating that autonomy that you need as a leader in this modern team, a high-performing team. The third is feedback. Use values as a starter and a guiding principle for the way that you give feedback in your organization and the way that you learn, both as an individual and as an organization, so that learning capacity increases materially in line with the culture that you're trying to build if you pull your values into that discussion. And then the fourth is it's basically cultural drivers. So how do you bring to life your values in the cultural drivers? And here I'm just going to take one example, but there are many. How are we delivering benefits for our team members as a factor of how much we understand their drivers? Like, because most of the companies that we work with are fairly bootstrapped, right? So they haven't got the deep pockets of a larger organization, and they're competing to both hire and retain key talent. But if you use your values and then ask the questions around, okay, so the drivers of the individuals who align to our values are going to be motivated by receiving benefits that are in alignment with those, can actually cut through to an intrinsic motivation rather than a fiscal need to drive up the budget associated with the things that they get over and above their pay packet. Stop there. So those 4 things, really important.
Oh man, you are hitting right at all of the nerd trigger devices by mentioning another framework. So big fan of that. But
yeah,
it's interesting when you mentioned that.
Yeah, and I've measured it. I've checked. It's like empirical. I know that it makes a difference.
No, it's really solid stuff. And as I was listening to you, it actually took me back to something that Patrick said in terms of how he and his colleagues have built their organization over the years. So when you talk about how do you create a decision-making framework that's aligned with your values to create an autonomous workforce, and we opened the conversation about how do you build an agile workforce, that is really links right back to what Patrick was talking about, the feedback component in terms of embedding that into your values. Well, everybody's got open carte blanche to ask why. And I want to get Patrick's sort of thoughts on, hey, is there anything in that framework that you'd like to expand? Because Jane's actually executed this across multiple organizations, but I want to get your take on it now that we have both of you together, where you look at that framework. How have you seen that work, or what would you add to that framework that you think is important for leaders to be aware of?
Yeah, 2 things specifically I would call out. One is I really liked how Jane said employ the values when you're giving feedback. We also like to use that when we're framing up discussions. So based on our values of transparency and reliability, we need to discuss these 3 things today and how we're going to execute on that in this specific, example. So I think that's really key. We also think about, are you living the values out, but also are you kind of preaching the values or embodying the values when you frame up discussions and when you give feedback, and especially as you go up the kind of management chain in the company, it's one thing to live them out. That absolutely is a given, needs to be there. But also, how are you reinforcing the values in your departments, in your discussions, that sort of thing. So that was one. I think the other thing that Jane touched on, I think it was the fourth point. What else can you do in terms of values for your employees that isn't necessary, monetary? One of the things we really felt like, in terms of elevating our employees, we wanted to give them some time to have some creativity. And the way we did that, because kind of thinking about the whole person, not just the employee sitting in the seat doing their function, in 2015, we moved to a 4-day work week, and we paid them for 5 days. But we wanted that fifth day to really be something where they're investing back in themselves. And we talk about it in one-to-ones, how are you using your fifth day? And it's not that we really care, but we're curious to see, how these individuals are kind of investing in themselves. And we have a Slack channel called Fifth Day, and it's cool to see employees just posting, a project they're working on, a class they're doing, or a hike they're on, that sort of thing in the Fifth Day channel, and seeing them invest back in themselves, so that kind of 3-day work week or work weekend is really a refreshing point and gets their minds kind of in a separate creative space. So that's one way we think, we're employing some of those values, in a way that's a benefit to our folks.
So I think that's, oh man, that's really cool. I think the part that struck me when you were just mentioning that, Patrick, is how you take that extra day and you're trying to be as deliberate as possible in encouraging the people within your team to invest in themselves. And there's a reason why I latched onto that. I think the biggest untapped resource that organizations are missing out on is developing their own people. I mean, most organizations are so focused on just getting stuff done that they haven't really built in an ecosystem or part of their ecosystem to, have their people kind of advance their skills or look at where they can make pivots into the organization. So creating that space intentionally really allows for you to have a longer term view of your people strategy than what's typical in a lot of organizations. And I wanted to call that out. I want to stay with you real quick. And we've kind of talked about how this shows up in various ways, but I want to bring it all together. So we started the conversation about, hey, how can a values-led organization, or how can being values-led build better organizations? I want to bring this full circle and talk through, hey, what are some examples of how you've seen this actually drive more sustainable results as a business leader, so that people have that in their back pocket, or at least in the back of their mind as they look at impacting change within their organization. So Patrick, I know that we've talked about a couple examples here or there. Share with the class some additional things that might come up that you feel is important in terms of how you execute this stuff.
Yeah, one example comes to mind, and I think we're a decently lean organization as it is, but during COVID, when that hit, I had managed at another company through the global financial crisis, and we did 2 rounds of layoffs back then. And one of the things that I was asked by an employee afterwards, it was essentially, can we not do layoffs again? Can we all take a pay cut? And I think there's positives and negatives to that. But one of the things we talked about during COVID, we didn't know how long it was going to be. And we went to everyone in the organization and we all took pay cuts. And we went through several months, I think it was around 6, maybe more. And then we returned those salaries, and ultimately, I think we made good on that with giving out some options in lieu of that. But it really, I think, brought us together as an organization to get through COVID. I mean, you can't always do this. And I think that's just one way of we wanted to go to our employees and say, hey, we don't know what this is all about, but we're all in this together, and we want to try to live out what we preach. And I think that worked well for the time. I don't know if that's what you're after.
No, I think I think it again goes back to how does being values led show up and become embedded in everything that you do as an organization. So I think that provides a pretty significant contrast to what we see in the world of work now. I mean, every company under the sun is just like cutting everything to the bone on the suspicion that something is going to go sideways. So there's an interesting contrast there. I want to get Jane's input on, what are some of the use cases that you've seen where organizations have really deeply embedded values, and that's informed how their people strategy, their customer strategy, how their overall strategy shows up. And we may even want to take this how do you communicate layoffs, because that's a great point that Patrick drew out. So what have you seen that's relevant to this conversation that we're having?
Great, amazing. I'm going to just use 3 examples, just like anecdotes of things that I've learned, actual examples. The first is that we have a global group of recruiters in our stable, and we continuously vet them for quality purposes. And one of our most important recruiters did a like-for-like comparison where they took overtly values or mission purpose-driven organizations and looked at the quality. They had the various indicators, the quality of talent that they could attract to a role versus the same title, the same scope of role, and looked at the material difference between the two. And what they saw was incredibly stark. To the positive of the purpose-driven organization. So they reported to us that we, by investing in purpose-driven organizations and then being overt to hiring to those values, they were able to attract over quite a big data set, a significantly higher level of talent and engagement in a hiring process than those that had just, let's just say, plain vanilla, but same title, same scope. So I thought that was very interesting. Shows up in hiring. The second is, you asked about layoffs or making layoffs in this environment. I will say rather, I'm just going to give my point of view here based on what we experience. I have a hard time convincing our CEOs to embed a 4-day week. There's too much to do. They're too bootstrapped. The teams are so lean. The milestones that need to be achieved are significant. And to get, they're just tough places to work, startups, right? They're not for everyone. And I just want to go, kind of just be truthful about that. It's also true that some individuals who say they want and say that they can perform in this environment find it really difficult. There is also true, again, to be controversial, but truthful here, that there are individuals and skill sets that are critical to achieving the next growth milestone, and they need to be retained in the business. So taking all of that unfairness, the CEO has a tough decision, should use something data rich like a 9-box grid or a 6-box grid in order to make layoff-based decisions, and then should be clear about cut once, cut deep, because everybody's going to be worried about what's in it for them and whether they're at risk. So be clear, be decisive, don't BS, don't try and sugarcoat the message, but being clarity there, I think, is really important. Try and do it as fewer times as possible. Try and be thoughtful about the data that you're using to assess based on what you need to skills you need in your business in order to achieve the next milestone, and obviously those that are performative based on some metric or some level of indicators.
So I think there's something that's really important about what you mentioned, Jane, that I think it's worth repeating, and it's how you communicate the message. I think one of the things that, especially when you're looking at layoffs and things like that, I think one of the things that just really annoys the hell out of the broader employee landscape is when a company announces mass layoffs, and you'll have some leader within the organization, kind of like the crying Jordan version of a CEO talking about how this was so damaging, and they make it about them instead of the people that just got released from their job. So I think from a values perspective, it's important to be, truthful, be direct, and don't make it about you. There's a values component as well, and offer whatever support you can to kind of advance the initiatives of the folks that got laid off. Yeah. So I want to keep it with you before we wind down. So we've covered a lot of ground. I don't know if we've solved all of the problems, but we've solved several of them, especially with your frameworks that you've thrown out there. So that's awesome. But if you're to take one, or I might give you two critical takeaways when people are thinking about, or leaders are thinking about building a values-driven organization, what are the things that they need to put in place? What's your advice to those people that are looking to be more values-led as a leader versus the standard operating procedure that happens to be out there?
Yeah. So if you only do one thing, and I will try and answer it in one, I'm usually greedy and go for as many as I can. And I haven't mentioned it today, and I really need to. And again, I do have a model underpinning this. I can go into it in more detail, but it's this: cultivate trust. Pay attention to the way that trust shows up. Trust underpins great leadership. It's like the oil in a car. You can go a little way without it, and then things start to clunk a bit, and then the odd thing might fall off, and then before you know it, you've kind of you stopped. If you can cultivate trust, and there is a metrics way, how we unpack trust and how to measure it, something that I'm working on and love this work. But if you can pay attention to that, it will drive a values behavior that will get you over these hurdles and the setbacks and the adaptations and the resilience that your organization, your team need to be able to sustain for the long run. It's the oil that will help you go further together.
So the trust part, I think it's important to tie back to the early part of the conversation where, look, you have to take your values and actually live them. And that's actually one of the ways that you can actually build trust. So I'm glad that you called that out. Patrick, key takeaway or framework? Well, no, we're going to stay away from frameworks. Key takeaway from for you. What's your advice for people that are looking to pivot or build a values-led organization?
Yeah, it's actually a point Jane made earlier. When we interview new folks, we do a skills-based interview and then a values interview afterwards. And we tell them, interview us as much as we're interviewing you. We want to be aligned with your values and, vice versa. So I think that's really key. If you're implementing that, keep them separate. I do kind of agree that values are definitely more important than the skills. And sometimes you can get in a pinch point. Don't make the compromise on the values. It'll pay off in the long run for you. And then I would just say another takeaway, values-led organization, especially from this conversation, values need to permeate everything. Don't keep them locked away or in one department, not another. They've really got to play out all the way through to the customer.
If this was an NFL game, I'd have thrown a flag on you because you gave 2 takeaways instead of 1. So that's cheating, but I'll let it go. So staying with you, Patrick, where can people find you?
LinkedIn is a good spot. That's probably the best. Yep.
Awesome. Jane, where can people find you?
So also on LinkedIn, I'm Jane Elizabeth Reddin on LinkedIn. You can find me at the Albion VC website, and would love to hear from you.
So I want to thank you both for this great conversation. I think between the both of you, there's a lot of conversation and thought that we advanced here, and we actually probably solved a number of tactical things that's going to be helpful for our audience as well. For those of you who have joined us on the live stream, either on YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn, we appreciate you checking out the conversation. If you have feedback or comments or just any questions, offline, make sure you ping them to me or any of our panelists. You can find me obviously all the time on LinkedIn, but I'm also on TikTok and YouTube and Facebook and sometimes on Twitter. I'm not on Instagram because that's only for food pics. But we certainly appreciate the continued support of the show. Obviously, if you have a talent strategy question and you want to hash those through, you can certainly reach out to me over email or LinkedIn. Happy to have conversations where we are actually working on giving you a more defined talent strategy and helping you move your people's careers further faster. Thanks for joining us on Talent Strategy 60, and tune in next time for another great conversation with some of the best and brightest in the fields of tech and HR.
Thanks,